Well, welcome back, everybody, and welcome to this very special well, they're all very special sessions, but this is super special, I think. No offense to Tom or Joe or anybody else. And we're going to be talking about Dr. Jim Swan, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, well, maybe 3 years ago now, who each of us here on the screen have had experience of, and we're blessed to be able to spend time with and learn a huge amount in that time. And we have David Thompson, obviously one of the founders here at Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery. We have Ian Chang, who was the master blender and distiller at Cavalan, but is now heading up another exciting project, which I'm sure he will tell us about. And we also have Dom Roscoe, author and all-round whiskey guru. Is that okay for you, Dom?
Yeah, thank
you. Who has come on? He wrote a very incisive article about Jim Swan not long ago, just a month or two ago, I think. So it's kind of renewed our need and want to remember Jim and to talk about his achievements and his legacy as well. So that's why we're all together in this tasting, this session. We're also going to be tasting some more Filey Bay Yorkshire Day, apart from Ian, because we couldn't get him any in time. So sorry about that, Ian. But we will get you some, Ian. Don't worry. I'm sure you've got plenty of whiskey to get on with. So I'm going to go to you first, Ian, if that's all right, and just because I know out of all of us, you spent I think the most amount of time with Jim, and we've discussed this many times, but for you he was very much a father figure, because you came to him in your formative years when you were really young, good looking, and yeah, you know what I mean, though. No, you were, but you were bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and ready to learn. And it must have been an incredible period in your life. So it would be really great to understand. Well, firstly, your first impressions of Dr. Swan, and how you came to meet him.
Yes. So I met Dr. Swan. That was 2006. So it was when Cavalan first invited him to come to Taiwan to be the consultant. And the very first time I met him, he was very serious. And at that time, I thought, it was going to be maybe very hard to get along with him and so on, and has to be very strict. So I have to be careful all the time. But he turned out to be very friendly and also caring, and also very patient mentor, teacher, someone who can explain everything to you in details and also in great patience. So I was learning with him for 12 years. So from 2006 to 2017, right before he, until he passed away. So it was a very memorable 12 years learning, and also not just whiskey itself, but as Eddie, you mentioned just now, someone who was very much like a father figure to me. So even life in general, he would give me advice and also many ideas on many things. Very grateful to him. I am.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all met lots of people who know about whiskey and have a great deal of knowledge about whiskey, but there was something about the way that Jim could talk about whiskey which made you feel completely involved and not excluded in any way because you were in well, obviously his inferior in respect of me. I felt like a minion at his feet in terms of knowledge and so on. But he never made you feel that way, because he was so involved and inclusive. And I think that really came across. And so, in terms of your learnings with him, Ian, and obviously you've now left Kavalan. That's quite well documented. But we're obviously very excited that you're starting a new project in Japan. Are there any particular learnings, experience from your time with Jim that is going to help you with your whiskey making going forward in Japan?
Yes. So I was very fortunate that with Jim, he taught me not just how to produce whiskey in the heat, which is the climate of Taiwan, but also during the 12 years, he also showed me what to do if the whole condition changed. For example, from subtropical to a cold climate, for example, in Japan. So I'm very much looking forward to producing whiskey in Japan with a different, not only methods, but also mindsets as well. So that is very important, and especially in terms of wood policy. In the previous sessions, David was talking to Joe on wood policy, on wood. So, that happened to be Jim's expertise. So that is something I have to, I would say, apply, and also, use a brand new wood policy for the project in Japan, so that not only we can make sure that the quality is good, but also hopefully to speed up the maturation naturally by using, the correct size of the cask, the correct wood in terms of American oak or European oak, and so on. So when you combine all these together, you'll be on the right track to produce something good. And I think Spirit of Yorkshire is a perfect example. I tried the whiskey. I think that was a few years ago in London, and also in Manchester, when Joe and David were very kind to share a small drum with me. And at that time, Spirits of Yorkshire was very young. The spirit was very young, but you could see the attention to details, to the new make, and also to the wood as well. And therefore, despite the young age, it was very delicious. So that is, once again, I think something I'm sure Jim also showed Joe and David at the distillery. So this is what we're going to do in Japan as well for the new project.
Yes, and the new project itself, I know myself, it's still in development. What can you tell us? Can you tell us maybe a little bit about it, and what the objectives of the project are?
Yes. So the whole project apparently started in, I think, 2019 by Koji. Koji is my partner in Japan. He actually founded the company first, and also he had the idea of having a brand new distillery in the greater Karuizawa area, because he himself is a resident there. So after 2008, when the old Karuizawa closed down, Koji would like to set up a new distillery to firstly to bring back the distilling industry into back to the area, but most importantly, he would like to create a new legend for the area. So when I was introduced to him in last year, 2020, right after I left Kavalan, when when I talked to him for the very first time, I found that we had the same vision and also the same goal in mind. For him, he wants to create a new legend, but for me, I would like to continue Jim's philosophy and also Jim's legacy. So it was an instant hit. And recently, just today is the 31st. It was on the 27th of this month. We had the groundbreaking ceremony in Komoro. That is the exact place where we would build our first distillery, Komoro Single Malt Distillery. So the construction has already started. So hopefully we would like to finish the construction towards the end of next year so that we can start producing whiskey either by the end of next year as well, or hopefully by the beginning of 2023. So something very exciting, and also something I very much look forward to with you as well, Eddie, because you will be curating the Whiskey Academy for us. And, I'm sure the two of us will be a, how do you say that, dynamic duo.
Yeah, indeed.
So, yeah,
No, I mean,
produce whiskey and you tell people how we produce it. So
you produce the whiskey and I'll drink it. I mean, tell people that. Yeah, that's good. So in this case, Jim Swan's legacy is Komoro Distillery in Japan. So it's
Yes.
great to see one of his greatest students, if you like, developing their own project along with obviously Koji. Yes, no, absolutely. Right, Ian, thank you so much. I'm going to go to David now, if that's okay. And we're going to ask David similar questions about Jim. And how did you come to meet Jim? I mean, we kind of touched upon it a little bit in the last session, the with regards to the farming and the field to bottle. But at what stage in your journey did you meet up with Dr. Swan?
First of all, I would like to sort of ask the question of you guys: which one's Batman and which one's Robin? But
but we can negotiate.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it goes right back to when we first started talking about the spirit of Yorkshire and making whiskey, and it was Tom's real experience of setting up a brewery some sort of 20 odd years ago. It's okay getting the right kit, but if you don't have the right sort of people around you to impart their knowledge, then you're never going to make a great beer. And it was exactly the same process that Tom and Jill went through to find somebody who was world renowned for whiskey making. And the more Tom and Jill investigated, the more Jim Swan's name came up. So it was clear at that time that Jim was the guy that really we needed. And I think they met up 2014 in London. He was flying in and out. I mean, Ian will sort of tell you that Jim was on a plane pretty much all of his life, traveling around the world to different distilleries, imparting his knowledge. And so to catch him at a point in time when he was sitting still was pretty impressive, really. So after we sort of had that initial meeting, and Beck and myself and Tom and Jill sat together, and we decided that Jim was definitely part of the spirit of Yorkshire from the word go. And this was even before we bought the stills, even before we'd even designed the stills. And his knowledge, he's a chemist at heart. I mean, he knew how to make a fantastic spirit, but it starts with the equipment. So we actually went to Forsyths on the back of Jim's recommendation, which is probably the Rolls Royce of still makers. And we talked at length about the type of still and the type of product we're trying to make, all led by Jim's knowledge. And then we threw a little bit of a curveball at Jim. We said to him, okay, Jim, we get this, but how do we put a Yorkshire twist in there? How do we be different, but not forsaking the quality? And he said, yeah, well, fair enough. Let's look at that. And we decided we would put in 4-plate rectifying column next to our spirit still. Now, Jim hadn't got any direct experience of that, but he wasn't blown away by it. You know, he didn't say, no, that's wrong, it's not traditional, it's not going to do the right job. He was very open to having that discussion, and that was the beauty of Jim. You know, he would take on board what we were trying to do, as well as impart his knowledge chemically of how to get there. So you can't actually see it, but sitting next to me here is our 4-plate rectifying column, which gives us that fantastic ability to make 2 new make spirits. And when we got it all set up and commissioned and Jim came down, you know, we had a few teething problems, but again, Jim would take that in his stride and he would say, okay, you know, it's not quite working right yet, but it will, you know, we'll get there. And it was his confidence, you know, when you were sitting next to somebody who's commissioned stills around the world and produced such great spirit and you know, it gave you confidence. It gave you confidence that you were going to be okay. And, you know, it's a big leap of faith getting into whiskey making. And to have that guy next to you was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I can imagine. So maybe this is a difficult question to answer, but do you think you could have done it without his assistance?
Well, if I go on my short answer, that would be absolutely not, or no would be even shorter. You've got to have that sort of background knowledge. We didn't have it. You know, we always believed that getting the best stills we could, the best ingredients we could from the farm, and the best sort of advice. You know, those are the 3 main ingredients you need to make a quality product. And but Jim's knowledge was much deeper than we managed to sort of impart from him, really. And Tom tells a story of I think it was his eulogy actually, up when he went up to his funeral. I unfortunately couldn't make it. I wasn't around, but I think it was Ian Patterson possibly who said Jim's like a fire hydrant. You know, he opens his mouth, all this water comes out and all this information comes out, and he can only take a little bit of it in. And, you know, you've got to write very quickly. I mean, I have a little black book. I wrote as many things in as I could because I knew that I could sit down afterwards and really look at where Jim was going with his advice. And, yeah, he was an incredible guy, and the knowledge was just unbelievable.
Yeah, for sure. It reminds me of an instance where I met him for the first time at the IWSC judging, I think, probably one of the first years I was there, and he and I arrived a bit early before all of the others had descended, and so it was just him and me. And so he invited me to dinner the night before the judging started, and we sat over a very nice dinner, very nice bottle of wine, and he started to talk, and it felt like a wave of wonderful knowledge and just incredible detail, and just you know, and as I said earlier, just in the way he would describe things, he wouldn't presume that you would know things. He wouldn't presume anything really. It was just very, very, very well put across. Unfortunately, the next morning I'd forgotten everything. Head like a sieve. So, you know, he probably told me the whole meaning of life through whiskey, and you know, yeah, it was just too much for my poor little brain to maintain. So in terms of his legacy, David, I mean, obviously there's distilleries like yourselves and Cavallan and all of the other distilleries around the world which have had either minor or major involvement from Jim Swan, but the kind of wider legacy, what do you think is going to be the thing he is most remembered for, and what people will continue to really push with regards to whiskey production?
Yeah, I mean, fruit. The amount of times Jim said to me, fruit. You know, he was passionate about driving as much fruit esters into the whiskey as possible, and that started with the mashing and the fermentation, and getting that absolutely right. I mean, he talked about a canvas, and the canvas was that wash. If you have that wash and it's consistently good and it's got loads of fruity esters, you are halfway there to make a really fruity whiskey. So his legacy is that light, I think, the lighter style of spirit, with full of fruit and full of character, but not to the extent where it's losing its body. It's still got the sort of the depth to it as well. And then his knowledge of, as Ian alluded to, his cask knowledge and maturation processes were pretty much groundbreaking at the time. He came to us with the STR cask, and he'd developed that pretty much from scratch. So that legacy will continue, and I guess to an extent, our only sort of regret is that Jim isn't here today to share in everything we've done. He always knew we'd make a great whiskey, but not to actually sit with him and share that moment. Yeah, it's sad, but he will live on. He'll live on in everything we do and everything the other distilleries do around the world.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I don't think anyone will ever forget his indelible mark that he's left on the whiskey industry. Well, thank you very much for that, David. I'm going to move on to Dom. He's been waiting patiently there for a while. So, Dom Roscoe, can you hear me? Oh, I think you're muted. Hold on.
Am I?
Oh no, you're okay now.
Okay.
How are you, Dom?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Good to see you. Yeah, I'm doing okay and getting better. Yes. So where do we find you today?
I'm at home in Norfolk. I've been out for my first overseas visit this week, so that was
wow.
Exciting and also quite scary. It shouldn't have been, but it was. But yeah, I just felt there was a sense that maybe we're starting to see some light now. But I'm back in Norfolk. I'm looking after the dogs. My family's away on holiday, so I'm guarding the dogs and chilling. Lots of sport.
And the house to yourself.
Yes.
Very
drinking
good.
whiskey in the day. You can't get better than this.
Fantastic. Well, it's always good to see you, Dom. So obviously you obviously knew Jim very well yourself, and I'm fascinated to understand, the piece that you wrote, the Jim Swan effect, and what I imagine that was quite tough in a way to write, because obviously you knew him very well, and it's not that long ago that he passed away, so it probably brought up fresh memories, and I imagine it was quite an emotional thing to do.
I actually didn't really know him that well. I mean, I spent time with him in Taiwan when I went to Kavalan, and I have a sense of him as a person. The thing about him is that fire hydrant reference I don't really get, because the thing about Jim was he was actually quite inward. He's more like a champion Sudoku player. He would look at a puzzle and he'd work it out, and he'd look at every puzzle differently and work it out. So when he told Spirit of Yorkshire or Kavalan they could make whiskey, he was faced with different problems in each. But my experience of him was that I went over to Taiwan with a very loudmouth, opinionated distiller who I won't name, and I've got cyclothymia, so I'm like a big puppy. I get overexcited. So we were blah 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 blah, and Jim didn't really say a lot. And then when he did, you started to realize that everything he said was valuable, and he had all this knowledge that he didn't need to throw in your face, and he expressed it very quietly and very quite briefly, really. But everything he said, you thought, wow. And after 3 or 4 days with him, you thought, this guy's amazing. But he didn't sell himself. He had no marketing. He had no PR. He didn't sell himself at all. So that piece was a result of the fact I felt that when he died, I wasn't editing at the time. And I don't think the industry, the media part of the industry, quite understood how important he was. And then suddenly, I think distilleries are a little bit like submarines. You know, they have a grand opening day and it's all fantastic. And then they go underwater for 3 years and we hear nothing about them. And then they come up. And it just happens that in the last year, all these submarines have been coming up, and there's Spirit of Yorkshire, and before that, Cotswolds, and we can go on. And I just suddenly thought, you know what? Everywhere I go, Jim Swan's legacy is now on display. And it's about time we really recognise that. So that's where the feature came from. I did speak to his family quite a lot because what David said about it's a shame you couldn't share a dram with Jim and show him what you've done. His family never really appreciated how important he was because he never took it home. So they're loving the fact that he's being recognised, and that, you know, I spoke to the sister, sorry, one of his daughters, and said, you know, are you happy with this? And they just didn't comprehend how important he actually was.
Well, that's quite remarkable, isn't it? I mean, talk about hiding your light under a bushel.
Yeah.
But all power to him, though. You know, I think it's very difficult sometimes to maintain a healthy work-home balance. But obviously, he managed to you know, keep the two very, very separate. So in terms of what he brought as a well, clearly as an incredible knowledge and font of all that he was. What do you feel were his biggest strengths in terms of production? Was there anything that really stands out for you?
Yeah, without a doubt. The thing is that this is a controversial answer because Scotland has a habit of shooting the messenger, and I just happen to have made my living from world whiskey, not because I have a problem with Scotland. I don't. 2/3 of all my books are about Scotland, but I get my newness, my exciting stories from the new world, what I call the new world of whiskey. And if you remember way back, Macallan went through a thing where we'd been told for years and years and years that colour didn't matter and colour wasn't the grade of an old whiskey because it could be caramelised or it could be from a sherry cask, not a bourbon cask. It could be third fill, not first fill, and on we go. Then suddenly Macallan came up with a whole colour code of gold and amber and all sorts of things. Well, I feel in a sense that Jim has done an equivalent thing for world whiskey, because for most of my career, we've been told that you need to be 10 or 12 years old to be a good whiskey. But that's because Scotland dominated the whiskey market, and that's what it needs in Scotland with their temperatures and their humidity and the dreek and everything that goes with Scotland. 10 to 12 years is important. And then they've started breaking their own rules by going for non-age statement stuff that's a lot younger. And I've always said, you want to go down there, you'll lose, because there's countries that are able to mature spirit at a lot younger age. We're at one virtually now. And so Jim Swan did that. He basically showed that Cotswolds, Spirit of Yorkshire, Israel, Milk and Honey, Taiwan, obviously, Kavalan. The first time I tasted Kavalan, it was I had two samples. One was dark chestnut, and one was light lemon. And they were both, I think, 2, maybe 3 years old, and they were sent into Whiskey Magazine as Chinese whiskies. And they blew my mind because they were incredible. And that's what Jim's offered. And he's done it through 2 specific things. I'm sure you've talked about this already, but he encourages his distilleries to make an earlier cut. So economically, it's not so great, but you're taking spirit with more fruitiness, the very thing David was talking about. So you start with an incredibly fruity and big new make spirit. And secondly, the STR cask issue and recasking into shaved, toasted and recharred casks. And so he's making whiskies, or he's helped distilleries make whiskies, and all very different distilleries as well. But they're all making spirit that absolutely outdoes anything from Scotland at 4 or 5 years old. Fact. Any number of, look at the awards the Cotswolds has got. You know, I'm drinking this, and it's just phenomenal. And so, ironically, Jim, as a Scotsman, has opened the world to compete with Scotland at whiskey, and I think that's just great.
Yeah, I think I'd certainly agree with most of that, and I think that you're absolutely right. I think he's definitely helped to not only provide us with whiskies which don't necessarily need an age statement, because, as you say, they've achieved this kind of accelerated maturation through various techniques and climates. But I think it's also broken down the walls in terms of the phrase non-age statement, and we've talked about it quite a bit today. Here at the Spirit of Yorkshire, where we are today, there isn't an age statement on any of the bottles, and having tasted the Yorkshire Day, as you say, the 2021, it's stunning stuff, and you would certainly think it was much. Traditionally, you would think it was much older than the 5 years that it actually is. But it just illustrates beautifully that age statements, if the whiskey is handled correctly, age statements are irrelevant. And I think that what Jim and those distilleries have done is pave the way for other distilleries to play around with that, and to really, hopefully, if done in the right way, release whiskies without fear of having their products preconceived as not as high in quality because they don't have an age statement applied to them.
I think that originally Australia, Tim Duckett, particularly at Hartwood, 20 years ago, he contacted me, and he didn't like the expression rest of the world. He said, why should you have Scotland and Ireland and all those places, and then we're in the rest of the world with India and Taiwan? And he said, it's just make us feel second division. And secondly, he said, having no information on the size of the cask or the climate of a country and the humidity of a country is like having a latitude but no longitude on a map. You just can't do it. And he said, we don't want to be judged in under 12 years old, because we're 3 years old. And that's, and India's had some amazing whiskey at 6 years old. And the only reason age statements, I think, still are important is because, and Ian will probably be able to tell me if I'm right about this, but I think in Asian countries, age is seen as a standard. Particularly, I used to work at the whiskey shop, and if I had an Indian customer come in, I knew he would ask me about the age of the whiskey. And it sounds immature at 4, but it doesn't need to be immature at 4. Cotswolds is not immature at 4. This is not immature at 5. So, but different countries have, different views, and it's almost like a marker. The age is a standard for Asia, particularly. Am I right, Ian?
Yes, that's right, Dominic. Many consumers here in this part of the world, they have this, understanding of having older the age, the better the quality. But Jim's philosophy is to teach producers to produce quality whiskey. And you don't have to look at the age, because, to Jim, it's all about quality. So that's what, when David mentioned about fruity and also about STR, these are all the quality attributes that Jim looked for in a good whiskey. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, sorry. And so when you were developing Kavalan, Ian, did you know, or did he know that before any of the casks actually matured, but when you first started filling casks, did he have any inkling as to how it was going to be so mature in such a short space of time, or was that kind of something that was discovered, or was that an experimental thing that worked out, or what occurred?
Yes. So what happened was, before Jim came to Kavalan, what he did was he gathered all the information, including the temperature profile, humidity profile, and also the precipitation and so on. So with these data on hand, and then plus the kind of wood policy that he designed for Kavalan in terms of ex-bourbon, sherry, and so on, he knew, or I would say he could estimate what the quality would be like, in 3 years, in 6 years, and so on. And that is something, that I really admire Jim for, because as I mentioned, I always, call him the encyclopedia of anything alcoholic, not just whiskey, because he knew everything, and he knew what to do, what kind of combination to use in terms of new make and wood, plus the local climate. And this is why for the project in Japan, we're going to do the same, to have different combinations, so that we can have quality whiskey, fingers crossed, in a short time. That is something that I will be working on for the coming years. Very exciting, and very much looking forward to it.
Yes. So are you applying what you learned from Jim in terms of what you were describing? So looking at the humidity, temperature, etc., when it comes to maturation, are you applying exactly the same information in your calculations?
Yes, that's right, Eddie. So with the humidity and temperature profile of Komoro city, I'm calculating, and also doing some guesstimate of what to do, and also what will happen, in 3 years' time, in 6 years' time, and so on, in terms of quality. I mean, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And Dom, if you're still there, I hope you're still there.
Yes.
Just maybe can you tell us a little bit about the flavor maps, and the fact that Jim was one of the first to come up with the flavor maps that we now all take for granted. I mean, obviously they were a very big piece of work.
Yeah, before I do that, I'd just like to go back to what Ian was saying. And I was saying the other thing is about Jim was that he, I once said, quite controversially in a book, that the quality of the water is important, but whether it's soft or hard isn't. And everyone used to talk about spey water being soft, and you need soft water to make great whiskey. And yet Glenmorangie and Highland Park and the English Whiskey Company down here in Norfolk have all got very hard water. And if you look at Burton-on-Trent, where they make the best beer, Burtonization means making more calcium, making harder water, because the fermentation process is, for many, many years, the fermentation process wasn't as important in Scotland as the distillation process. That's understandable. Now I went to Glenfiddich, and they've got an English brewer. She's I spoke to her very nerdily for 20 minutes about brewing water to a different perspective, and why there's a difference between. And the thing is, Jim got all of that, and so it wasn't just that he was making different cuts. He was looking at all aspects of the production process and thinking outside the box. And he never really thought as a Scots person, I don't think. And the flavor wheel stuff, I've always been a little bit cynical about that, but he just knew that what he did. This is why I say he was like a Sudoku master, because he would look at the problem in front of him and say, how can I bring my flavor profile into this country or distillery? What is it in Taiwan that I have to overcome? And Ian might correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that the humidity in Taiwan is very similar to Scotland, but there's a 16 degrees average difference in temperatures. And Jim's biggest problem there was cooling. And is that right, Ian? Am I right about this?
That's right. That is exactly right, Dom. So the humidity of Taiwan and Speyside is actually quite similar. except for the fact, which you mentioned just now, there is a 15 to 16 degrees of difference in terms of temperature profile. Therefore, when he saw this and knew about it, he anticipated that the maturation period could be shortened in combination with the correct cut for the new make.
Yeah.
So that was exactly what he did for Kavalan.
But the amazing thing is that it's an expensive project to experiment, and yet he did it. Sometimes people look at entrepreneurs and say, well, I wish I'd thought of that. It seems so simple. But the mere fact that I didn't and they did, and they followed it through, and he led from the front. He was prepared to make investments. Because the other thing about Jim Swan that people don't talk about is he turned down 90. He wasn't interested in the money. He was interested in the project, and and as David said, he was never off a plane. But he was interested in the project, but he told 90% of the people who came to him, don't bother, you're not going to do it. You haven't got the money, you haven't got the time, you haven't got the resources. And he wasn't interested in just being a businessman. He was interested in the love of whiskey.
That's right.
Sorry. Yes, indeed. I totally agree with that. Well, talking about the love of whiskey, I'm sure if you've all got a glass, I know, Ian, sorry, you don't have it. But like I say, we'll get you some soon. So a glass of the whiskey. So I'd just like to raise a toast to the memory of Dr. Jim Swan. So Slanger Jim, Slanger. And I just want to thank David Thompson here at Spirit of Yorkshire, Ian Chang, who's very kindly stayed up past his bedtime in Taiwan, and to Dom Roscoe, who always lovely to see you, Dom. Thank you so much all for your time today. It's been a fascinating session. We could have done lots more, I'm sure, and I'm sure we will all continue to remember and honour the memory of Dr. Swan. But for now, thank you everyone, and we'll see you soon, hopefully.
Been an honour. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.